Bob Hafey, who we've mentioned in the very beginning, pardon me, is an aspiring writer intent on changing the world. No small dreams for this man. Tonight he's going to read 2 short selections from Boom Hood, his memoir about his free-range childhood growing up in Joliet. Bob?
Thanks, Tom. Good evening, everybody. Again, I grew up a baby boomer, so that meant you left in the morning, our back doors were swinging gates, and we were gone all day. Came back at night, so it was a pretty magical time to be a child. And yet, so we learned a lot of things through trial and error and experience. And yet our parents taught us some things. For instance, at Heggie Park on the east side, if you played ball there in August, the soil or the infield was this red clay dust. And if you sweated at all, it just caked on you. So as soon as I went home and walked in the back door, my mother would put her hand to my head and she'd teach me about contortionists, because she would say, just look at the dirt on the back of your neck. So obviously I wasn't a contortionist. So I'm going to read 3 short selections, not 2. The first is a grass toboggan slide. In the fall, when the wild grasses and weedy plants of Heggie's Hills turn from an assortment of greens into various shades of browns and tans, we would instigate an extensive search of the whole neighborhood for large, empty, corrugated boxes. A good flattened corrugated box on dry grass was as slick as a sled's runners on icy snow. We would haul our corrugated sleds to the highest hill, and while hanging on to the upturned front edge of the flattened box, push off and rocket down the grassy slope. When you sled on snow, the layer of snow along the sled protects your rear end from the protruding rocks and debris. On cardboard, it was a rough, ass-bruising ride. On one occasion, in between trips down the hill, someone came up with the brilliant idea to use some broken pieces of mirror we had found to signal or temporarily blind each other using the sun as our light source. We quickly tired of that activity and they all headed up the hill for another trip down. My cousin, who had found a really nice hunk of mirror, decided to put it in his pocket for safekeeping while he took his next trip down. After his trip to the bottom, he was delighted to find that his signaling mirror was still intact, but somewhat dismayed that the mirror had sliced open not only his pants, but also his thigh. A ghastly gash that was about 1 inch deep and 2 inches long caused all of our eyes to widen to that same approximate size when he dropped his trousers to display the wound. Even before thinking about treating the wound, we began the ever-important dialogue concerning how he was going to explain this to his mother. We settled on a story about him tripping and falling down a piece of glass. We then helped him home, and everyone except me ran in different directions to avoid involvement. I stuck around, watching him through squinted eyes as he poured hydrogen peroxide on the deep wound to disinfect it. I felt like fainting as he murmured like a girl when the disinfectant hit the open wound and bubbled like a 7-Up being poured into a glass that contained a little blood. The next story. Sex education in Heggie's Hills. And I know this is an all ages event. It's okay. Today the internet, television, and the movies provide more opportunities to observe the opposite sex scantily clad than we had chances to look at girls fully dressed. Most all of us went to Catholic grade schools where the nuns had instilled, or beat into us, a strong sense of right and wrong, especially when it came to anything sexual. I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to look at the girls in my class unless I raised my hand and asked for permission. Someone somewhere, maybe in their dad's sock drawer, came across a few copies of some very dated girly pinup magazines and brought a small stash of them to the hills. They weren't as graphic as a Playboy magazine, but they still revealed sights we hadn't even dreamt of or knew existed. My friends and I all had a good look, and then walked in very slowly, either limping or bow-legged. Last one. I'm supposed to jump right back. The last one, Sunday night dance at Joliet Catholic. Many of the teachers at my high school were priests or religious brothers. Just prior to the Sunday night dance, they stationed themselves at the dance entrance so they could play the role of the anti-sex police force. They monitored us as we paid the entrance fee to ensure we were wearing appropriate clothing. They entertained themselves by making sarcastic comments like, "Were you poured into those jeans, or were they tattooed?" This was their way of letting us know that tight clothing would lead to loose morals and eventual eternal damnation in hell. Then before the dance, they would roam around the dance floor looking for opposite-sex body parts that might come into inappropriate contact. If any of us was lucky enough to find a girl to slow dance, we would attract priests and brothers like shoppers to a blue light special in They would swarm to the pending horn with a flashlight in hand to ensure light would shine between the dancers in order to extinguish the glow. I have one more life lesson. I grew up with 8 siblings and no discretionary income. So me and my siblings often were wishing things were different or wishing for things we didn't have. So my mother would simply say, and my mother didn't have emojis. She used the word that starts with S. So she would say, wish in one hand and in the other, and see which one fills up first. Thank you.
Thank you.